All right, well, we just prayed and we're going to get started. So Skip left us at the door of chapter 15 on the topic of anger. And the sub-theme, Respectable says, hey, Mark, it's confronting sins we tolerate. And this is one that we often tolerate is anger issues. There's a place for righteous anger. We should have that. But this topic is sinful anger.
Can you give us some page?
I don't know if it's the same page. I got a hardback with me. I couldn't find my copy. On page 121 of my book, it's chapter 15, topic anger. 143. That helps. So he starts the chapter off with some quotes from a book by Robert Jones on uprooting anger. How he states it's a universal problem. And then he says, often our anger is directed toward those we should love most. Like our spouse or children, parents, whatever. And I remember many years ago, I was preaching in a jail, and there was it seemed to be a really nice guy. And you're always curious when you do jail ministries, why are they there? You're just kind of curious, what did they do? And
they
usually,
got caught.
They got caught. Usually you don't ask.
You got caught. I didn't. I worked in one for a year.
Okay.
Yeah. Intimately familiar.
This guy would take matches, and he made a cross out of matchboxes. He gave it to me. So, and I don't know if he volunteered or I asked, why are you here? And he said, child support. He just wasn't able to pay the child support. And but then he said, in addition to that, he said, I've had some anger issues. And he says, it's amazing. We often hurt the people we really love the most. And often that's with anger. And I've always remembered him saying, where's that effect? So usually our anger is towards someone maybe we should really, really love. He gives some definitions for anger. It says the dictionary simply calls it strong feeling of displeasure and usually of antagonism. He talks about the complexity of anger. He talks about righteous anger on the next page of my book, where Jesus, showed righteous anger when he cleansed the temple of all the shenanigans that he observed. He then says often our sinful anger is based on our pride, our selfishness, and or our desire to control. And we don't get our way, we get angry. We want it my way, our way. We don't get it, we get angry. We're selfish, we're proud. And really deals with that, I thought, very nicely in this chapter. He talks about what causes us to be angry. Usually we think it's someone else made me angry, when in reality he is saying the cause is within your own heart. It's because of something wrong in your heart, your pride, your selfishness that leads to your anger. And it may be an external provocative point, but it's your heart is the problem. And then he talks about some people externalize their anger in strong, usually hurtful language. Others externalize it more cleverly by, maybe belittling someone or using a lot of sarcasm, cutting comments. And some internalize their anger, and it builds into resentment and bitterness. So I'm just curious, if your anger mechanism, are you one who typically externalizes it or internalizes it? So how's your sinful operations work?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
All the above.
All the above. Okay.
Yeah, for me, I'm not angry or anything else, but when I raise my voice, Judy thinks I'm angry.
Okay.
And then if I don't talk loud enough, then she can't hear me. So, yeah.
Rock,
Sometimes,
hard place.
Yeah. All the above.
That's frustrating. Yeah, okay. Yes, I'm good at hiding it better than others, and others blow up, whatever.
I don't know, for me, with almost anyone, so children and coworkers, it's usually outward. My volume goes up, but with Evelyn, it's internal. And yeah, I just, you know what? It's best if I just shut up and walk away. And because
that doesn't help either, because then it just
it's worked.
It's
for
gonna
almost
come out.
Next month it'll be 30 years. It's worked for me, so I'm gonna stick with it.
Wow.
Maybe that's why it erupts with everybody else except for her.
Oh, my.
We'll
Well,
be in for counseling next
That's
week.
fine. It's a very real issue. I mean, this is something we all battle with this one. This is one, like the topic says, confronting the sins we tolerate. And this is one we often keep doing the same stupid things. He does share at the bottom of the page, if we have expressed our anger outwardly, we also need to seek the forgiveness of the person outwardly, one that we've wounded by our outburst of anger. I thought that was good. You know, I don't want someone to come up and tell me I've been having these horrible thoughts about you, and I just want you to hate your guts or whatever. I've been thinking this. I'd rather them not tell me that. Just keep it to yourself. It's you've not told someone else. It's private. Just deal with it. But if they've gone out publicly and expressed their anger to you, then that's important to come back where you've blown up on someone to go and say, look, I'm sorry, I lost it there. Would you forgive me? I sinned against you with my anger. And if you have kids and are watching all the anger, it's very important to get before the kids and say, kids, that just no excuse. I was wrong, period. You know, I sinned with my anger. Please forgive me. So that's, you know, nice point that he makes there. And then he transitions at the end of the chapter of the issue being angry towards God. And of course, this is what Satan wants you to do, is be angry towards God, the one who is only good, the one who's never done you wrong, you know. But that's Satan wants you to shake your fist at God, you know, as if God is the one who sinned against you, as if God is the one in the wrong, as if God is somehow dealing with you inappropriately. So he has a really nice, I thought, a nice page or two on that topic, and how we need to get away from that direction altogether. So chapter 15, he introduces the topic of anger. And then chapter 16, he talks about the weeds of anger, as he calls it. And I thought we'd camp out in the weeds. We spend some time in the weeds here in just a moment. But any questions on chapter 15, just an introduction to the topic of anger?
Yeah, actually, they call the weeds 15 in this book, but it follows right behind them.
Okay.
Okay.
So, you know, we learn anger, you know, you learn it from others too. Your sin nature is pretty good with it, but you learn from your parents. You know, I think it's Song of Solomon, my mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards. My own vineyard have I not kept. And the point there is, you know, the kids, there was some dysfunction or some anger there in the home. And it's often easy to learn the ways of anger by being around an angry person. So that's why Proverbs says, you know, do not go to an angry man. You know, avoid this type of person lest you learn his ways. So what that is saying is this is a sin nature issue, but it also you can learn it and develop it and get quite sophisticated in your anger by others who've been on an anger binge for many years. So choose your friends wisely. Anger is rough, you know. And I know in our home, my dad, you know, I love my dad, but he had anger issues, you know, just did. He just really struggled with it. My mom internalized it. My dad externalized it. So we don't want to do either. We want to handle our anger right, and we're going to talk about how to handle anger in just a moment. Let's talk about the weeds here. He talks about resentment. He says resentment is anger held on to. Most often, it's internalized. It arises in the heart of a person who's ill-treated in some way, but who does not feel in a position to do anything about it. So rather than confronting it or turning it over to God, they just keep it inside. And they continue to nurse the wounds, and dwell on the ill treatment. And that ongoing resentment, he defines bitterness as resentment that's grown into a feeling of ongoing animosity. Whereas resentment may dissipate over time, bitterness continues to grow and fester, developing an even higher degree of toxicity. So we want to talk about resentment, bitterness, just for a little bit. When you think of root sins, when I'm counseling someone, and you do the same, you know, men are like this. We try to find out what's the problem. Let's engineer the thing. What's the problem? Let's get to the root of this, you know. And there's usually just a couple root sins. Pride may be the overarching umbrella, and everything's maybe under that pride umbrella. But I'm wondering what is the root? What's going on here? And bitterness is called a root. You know, we're to put off this root of bitterness. And there's another root sin that is described by Paul. What is that?
Question.
Yes.
Back up a second. So the root, is that kind of the same concept as stronghold? Or is it two different concepts?
Different metaphors, but similar. Yep. So roots, you know, going down into the ground, holding something up, entrenched. I used to keep in my office. I didn't look. I may still have it on my top shelf. I keep an oak acorn, and it's on an acorn with a little root. You know, where I pulled it out of the ground, it's about 10 inches. Really easy to uproot on a good rainy day like yesterday. Man, I can uproot a 10-inch little oaks, you know, thing. But if you let that oak thing grow for a few years or a few decades, now I need a bulldozer. Get that to uproot it. I gotta do some serious excavating, and there's a lot of residual damage. I'm going to tear up the yard. I'm going to drop trees. I'm going to have a big hole to backfill, and so the sooner we can uproot these issues, the better.
You didn't want an oak tree in your yard?
I have an oak tree in my yard. I love them, but I don't want an oak tree of sin in my heart. So there's the root of bitterness. So often I'm dealing with someone, it's an anger issue, pride, but an anger issue that they haven't dealt with. It's sinful anger. It's built into resentment and bitterness. And the fruit of bitterness, we're going to look at in just a moment, is pretty ugly. So I might see the fruit, but as I look at the fruit of, let's say, immorality, I'm saying here it's going back to this root of bitterness, which was anger undealt with properly, not dealt with properly. So that's one sin that I regularly come back to, And then there's another sin that's the root of all kinds of evil.
Money.
Which is what? The love of money is the root of all kinds of monkey business, you know. And so often people who are bitter, it's often over money. When you put those two together, that's a bad, when those are woven together in a life situation, that's an ugly thing to untangle. Okay. And a lot of bitterness is over money, over material things. Not always, but often. So what I thought I would do is just take one of the weeds, that of bitterness, and talk about it real carefully tonight, and we'll pray together. So in Hebrews chapter 12 is the classic text. The author in chapter 12 talks about this subject, and I'll begin in verse 14, kind of introducing it. I'll just read the passage. So follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. 12:15, looking diligently, lest any man fail the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. So this is a very powerful paragraph. And so the first thing I'm going to highlight here is in verse 15, talking about bitterness. The author says, looking diligently. And the verb there is a participle, so it's not the main verb of the passage. We'll look at that main verb in a moment, but it's the word episkopos. And in the word episkopos, you'd have the Episcopal Church or the bishopric. It's the word for oversight. It's the word we get the word skopos, scope from. And so our English word scope comes from this Greek word. So the bishop is an overseer. He's to keep his eyes on the sheep. And in this context, we're to have our eyes, looking out for a problem, to be looking out for these symptoms, to be on guard very diligently, continually on guard, present tense. So we're to be on the lookout for bitterness. And the reason for that is it's very easy to get bitter if we're not careful. If we don't guard our heart with diligence, it's easy to become a bitter person. And of course, the most bitter person in anywhere is Satan. He is extremely frustrated, angry, and bitter. I'm talking about resentment. So anyway, so I'm going to talk about the symptoms to look for. I'm going to give you a dirty dozen. These are my observations. Some I can back up with a Bible verse, but these are my observations. If someone has bitterness, normally I'm listening, I'm watching, I'm observing, and one or more of these points will manifest themselves. The first point, often, not always, is the person's moody. So a bitter person is the person who's up and down, and they are more down than up. They're more down than up. They might have an occasional up, but they're easily irritated, frustrated, annoyed. They're kind of people that easily tripped up. Okay, so their spiritual equilibrium is very poor, and it's like if you work for this kind of guy, you're wondering who's going to show up at work. Is it going to be this guy or this guy? Okay. Or this woman, what's she gonna be like today? Because it's up and down, it's all over the map, right? It doesn't always mean they're bitter, but often I've noticed this. So moody. There's no grace. They're moody people. Number two, often you notice with someone who's bitter, they are a very demanding person. And this is how this works. The demanding person, if they don't have grace, has high expectations for people. They might be perfectionistic in their outlook in life. And so what happens, they're demanding people to reach this gold standard of their expectations, and they set the bar so high no one can reach it, or no one can consistently keep it. So basically, they set you up to disappoint them, right? So we were at this funeral for my brother-in-law this week, and I get it. One of my other relatives, I won't mention the name, has a plan. He has a plan for what the family should do. I couldn't do the plan. I could not adjust to his plan. I was 5 hours away. I had another front I was caring for. I couldn't do it. So I told him just nicely, hey, that's a great idea. I wish I could do it. I really wish I could do it, but I won't be able to make it. Okay. And he goes ballistic. He goes, he goes off. And I chose not to answer him. Okay. Because it didn't matter what I said or what my explanations, as righteous as I thought they were, it wouldn't have mattered. Okay. But he set this standard. He had an expectation. Will be there. They will be here. He will be here. We'll have this grandiose time. But he didn't take into consideration. We're on other interstate highways. We have a lot going on. And so he set me up for defeat. And now he was upset with me. Okay. And
It's
so
not Ted, is it?
I'm not going to tell you that. Who's he? Yes. So that person often, again, you're going to see a common theme. There's no grace. That demanding person, there's just no grace. There's no room for flex. It has to be that what they thought was the right thing or the expectation. And you can never please them. Okay. One guy said, when I die, put on my grave, I could never please her. I said, Joe, I'm not putting that on your grave. I'm not going to put that on your grave, but I could never please her. I could never do enough. Okay. All right. Number three, obviously anger is very involved because it goes from anger to resentment to bitterness. So anger is feeding. There's something where anger was misdealt with. So there's something with their anger, with the emotions out of control, a short fuse. They may be hiding it from you publicly, but if you were there privately, you're going to see the anger. Number three, there's an anger. And occasionally you'll see it slip through. Sometimes it's blatant in your face. You don't have to guess. It is, all out anger.
Good for the home team.
Yeah.
Anger.
Yeah. So anger. Because what happens, someone is, you didn't get your way. You've been discomforted in some way. It's all about me. You're selfish. You're proud. And now you're angry. Okay. Yeah. So anger. And again, there's no grace with that. Often the person I see bitter, people really struggle with it, are often control freaks. I see more people, they can't work for anyone else. They have to be independent, self-employed. I've got a whole list of people that the reason they're self-employed, they can't work with anyone else because they set people up for expectations that can't be met. and they're constantly frustrating people, and they're frustrated, so they go into self-employment. So I look around the room, and I'm not saying you're bitter because you have your own company, okay? I'm technically self-employed too.
This is the only bright spot in the whole message
Okay,
tonight.
all
I will never be
Well,
self-employed.
here's the
Lord willing.
problem. The bitter person is that person has to be in control. Okay? They have to be in control. They got to run the show. And that's their way so they don't get more bitter, more angry because everyone else is messing up, you know. So you might got to do the job, you got to do it yourself. So often, not always, there may be other issues why a person's a control freak. But often that person's control freak has more of a propensity to be disappointing and angry, and then have resentment and then be bitter. Okay.
Pastor, I'm here to stir up anger and discord.
John, you were missing maybe the greatest message ever preached. So symptoms to look for. It says looking diligently. So we're looking for moodiness. We're looking for someone who's demanding. We're looking, number 3, at someone who's angry. Looking at someone who be a control freak. Number 5, they're never happy. They're discontented. And you're going to see here in this passage that Esau is a very discontented man. Okay. So if the bitter person, you can't please them. I don't care what you do for them, what you get for them. They're bitter. It's a heart issue. You can't buy it. It's not on the shelf. The solution's not on the shelf. Okay. So
Sorry, what was number 4?
So number 4 is control freak. They have this they can't work with anyone. They get angry, they get disappointed, they get whatever. So number 5, they're never happy. They're discontented. Typically, a bitter person, the telltale sign is you're gonna hear it in their sarcastic words or their speech in general. So the tongue's the giveaway. Romans 3:14, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. So you're going to hear that sarcasm is the word cutting flesh. You know, so the person who's bitter, they may not be blowing up with their wife angry, but they're saying nasty things, just cutting statements, just critical junk, like, you know, razor blade talk. You know, number 7, the bitter person typically has a wounded spirit. There's just a wounded spirit. Okay. They feel overlooked. They've been hurt. They feel underappreciated. They feel taken for granted. They feel used, mistreated. There's just a woundedness about it. You just feel like the person's injured, you know, in their spirit. And the reasons are battling bitterness. With a bitter person, as they really get into their bitterness, they start to sound like a broken record. Number 8, they start to sound like a broken record. People who are bitter that I've dealt with, I can predict what they're going to say next because they've already told me that, and they've told it to me, and they've said it over and over and over and over. It's nothing new. It's the same exact same anger. They rehearse the same issue, and it's just a broken record. You know. And the reality is, every time they repeat it, they etch it deeper into their mind. Okay, so now you're cutting these grooves, you know, into your mind, the way the mind works. As you fixate, you become what you fixate on. You fixate on God, you become more like God. You fixate on your problem, you're going to become a more bitter person. So it's the person who remembers all the details and they reinforce it by telling the story over again. I remember watching Jim playing basketball, my middle son. I was a pretty good, pretty focused parent. So in Anderson, he played a total of 8 minutes and 14 seconds for the whole season. Okay, the whole season, 8 minutes, that's 1 quarter and 14 seconds into the second. The whole season.
But who's counting?
But who's counting? That's 16 games, 8 minutes and 14 seconds.
Who's
Now,
the record
during
keeper?
that time period, he scored 8 points. So I figured out how many hours we spent driving to practices and going to his games. It came to $75 per point he scored was the actual cost. And I estimated how many miles. It was 72 miles per point he scored. So the person who's bitter remembers the details. Because they're meditating on, right? You know, you've done it, I've done it. And you remember all these details. This is how much this cost me. This is how much I was set back. And this is the damage that was done. And you're a CPA. Okay, you write all the details down. You have a ledger. So you got the ledger running. And your poor wife or your poor friend gets to hear the ledger over and over and over. Okay. I had a letter written to me. I addressed it as a situation of missions. And the guy wrote me back. My address was, there's a problem between these two missionaries, and they're both doing end arounds. These two people need to grow up and talk to each other. And since that's not happening, you as the mission director, and I'm the pastor of one of those two guys, we need to get with those two guys and get this and confront this thing. And if not, it needs to go through Matthew 18. Okay. So I'm presenting a confrontation to get it right. And if not, there's other steps to take. Real simple. And I get a letter back, and the guy said, your suggestion is preposterous. This is doctor really big. And he said, your suggestion is preposterous. I read that letter. I walked outside around the church, and I said, I either cry or laugh, because this is tragic. This is tragic. Okay. And I just laughed. Preposterous. I repeated it over and over and over. I read the letter over and over and over. Yeah. And I wrote it back, Job says, for thou writest bitter things against me. Job 13:2. So sometimes you get a bitter, nasty letter. Sometimes it's a word said in a conversation, and you just remember the word. Remember exactly what they say. And you can't get it out of your mind. You think on it. You think of what you should have said. You think of what you did say. And you just repeat it, and you etch it, and you etch it. So your mind works as a broken record. Okay? A bitter person has a broken record going. You can hear it played. Number 9, a bitter person is really struggling with an unforgiving spirit. If you have a hard time forgiving someone, we all should have a spirit willing to forgive. When they ask, should be quickly given. You can't technically fully forgive someone unless they ask you. You can forgive in your heart. Yeah, I get it. But they need to ask it to then extend it. So an unforgiving spirit, is there someone you can't forgive? Is there someone, I've heard this so many times, okay, you're hurt. They need to make it right. I get it. Can we meet with that person? Let's talk about it. And they'll say, you know what? I'm just not ready to meet. I am hurt so badly, I can't meet with that person. I'm not ready to forgive you. Okay, I'm saying, wow. So when will you be ready to forgive? How long are you going to allow your bitterness to destroy you and eat you up? How long are you going to disobey God? Okay. They were wrong, but now you're wrong. Now you're wrong. Okay. You need to forgive. Okay. So there's a lack of forgiveness. And what happens, it can get more escalated. As we look diligently here, often that person, they have a vengeful spirit. They want God to make that person pay. And if something happens bad, they're rejoicing over their brother or their enemy stumbling. I mean, they're really glad it happened. I mean, they're jumping up and down. It's about time. They may even be praying that God will do that. Of course, the proverb says, again, rejoice not when your enemy stumbles. Of course, we shouldn't rejoice when our brother stumbles. But they're very, very vengeful. A person who's bitter, what you'll see starting to happen is the people who've hurt them, they start pulling away from. So a bitter person becomes more detached, more alienated, more isolated. And that's exactly where Satan wants you to be. He wants you to get out of church because you got hurt at church. Who hasn't been hurt at church? It's amazing anyone ever goes to church. You're probably, when life is over for all of us, probably the times we were hurt the most were by church people claiming to be Christian people. Okay. What happens? I'm not going to go to church. That's where all the hypocrites are. And that's where so-and-so is. I'm not going. I think of my stepdad who's not doing well either. He was out riding his horse on his property. I have a little over 300 acres. We have 75 acres of woods that goes back to 5-acre lots of hunting units. And he's on his property. And this guy is out basically hunting on our family property, but had the audacity to get in my stepfather's face and say, you're on my property and you need to get out of here. The guy's a gun. And my stepfather got off his horse. He got in that guy's face. I mean, like this. And said, you're on my property. And you need in no uncertain terms, you need to get off this property, or it will not end well. And that guy kind of got off the property. So we go twice a year. We go to one of the church. I'm trying to find a church for him. So we go to a church.
There's that guy.
Saw that one coming
That's saw that one coming.
There's like 35, 40 people in the church, maybe, on a good day, and there he sits.
He's the pastor.
No, he's in that church.
Mississippi Squirrel Revival.
Mississippi Squirrel Revival. And there he is. What are the odds? So afterwards, he tells me, that guy, I'm not going to church. I get it. Okay, we'll look for another church. And next time we come up. So that guy that was in Prattsburg. So the next time we come up, we go to a church in Penn Yan. That's like 20 miles apart. We go to that church.
And he's there again.
And there he is. He's omnipresent. I mean, he's created so many problems, he can't stay in one place. Okay. But what happens is bitterness, you start pulling away, and that's where Satan gets you. Yes, now you're having a pity party. Now you're all alone at your party, and you're sitting duck.
Pastor, yesterday at the food bank, I was talking to a lady out in one of the cars out here. I was asked her, "Do you have a good church you're going to?" And, "Oh, no, I don't go to church." I says, "Well, why not?" She says, "All you do is get hurt there." And I says, "Oh man."
Yeah.
So I can just worship at home. I don't want to go to church and get hurt.
Isn't that amazing? Just yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, just classic illustration. And I think there are people out there all over the Front Range that have given church a chance a little bit, and they got hurt, and they're done. I think visitors that often come to our church, they don't want to fill out a form. They're gun shy. They've been hurt, and they're just inching back, just looking maybe because they have a need. And that's where we as men here in our families, hey, love on them, be gracious to them, try to help them. Also point them to Jesus, because he will never disappoint them. Yes. We'll disappoint him in a heartbeat. And that's helping manage expectations. Hey, we're a church. We have our problems. I tell every person I go and visit their home about our church, we have a great church. We have our problems. I got my own problems. You're not going to find perfect people. But we have a great God. We're trying to serve him.
That's what I told her.
That's all you can do.
As men, all I can tell you is church is made up of sinful people. If you're looking for a perfect church, don't come here because I'm here.
Yeah.
So, but you need that fellowship. The Bible says not to forsake the gathering of yourselves. So.
Well, that person sits home, gets bitter and more bitter and more bitter. They're not hearing the word. They're not getting iron sharpening iron. They're not getting a friend alongside of them. So number 11, you're detached. You start to see that bitter person. They don't have friends. They've burned bridges. They're bitter. Who wants to be with them? Really, bitter people are not pleasant to be around. And then finally, the ultimate thing you see is when they're angry at God. That's when it's really entrenched. And it's like Job's wife. She just had it. What does she say to Job?
Curse God, die.
Curse God, die. Get it over with. That's a bitter woman. Okay, she was really struggling. Curse God. He's got to live with that. I mean, that was one of the worst parts of the. It's one thing to have all the health issues and have all the employment issues and all the money issues and everything else that guy was facing. But you'd like to think his wife would have been there. And maybe she was earlier, but at this point, he stinks. Job writes his breath was foul. He's not pleasant to be around physically. And she's done with it. She's just tired. Curse God, man. That's not what you do. You never curse God. That's terrible advice.
That breath thing's funny. Evelyn won't let me within 20 feet of her in the morning until I brush my teeth.
It's very real. So here we got it. So, and Satan wants you to get angry and bitter and especially turn on God. Okay? And if he can do the reversal where you view God as Satan and Satan as God, if you can do that reversal in your mind, that's the master switch. So the first phrase, you're looking diligently. So when I'm looking at someone listening, I'm just listening to their words, listening what's coming out of that heart. And often I'm seeing a combination of these things typically surfacing. Okay. Sometimes the whole package, but usually a few of these. And it's starting to direct me, okay. And as I start probing, I'm going to find out they've been hurt by someone. Okay. And they got angry and they didn't deal with it properly. And now they have resentment. And they've held on to that resentment. Now it's entrenching. We have a root of bitterness developing. It's really getting entrenched. So the recognition of it, you think of Naomi, she recognized her bitterness. What did she say? She said, call me not Naomi, which means pleasant, but call me what? Mara,
Yeah.
which means in Hebrew, bitter. So the first point, if we're going to have victory over bitterness, you have to recognize you have some. Okay. She said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. And then she tells you why. And this was her problem. If we're going to get this thing turned around, it starts with this text, for the Almighty hath dealt bitterly with me. So her view of God is like, where's the love of God? Where's the grace of God? Where's the mercy of God? What's her view of God? And the right view of God, one point about God, God is love. That's a right view of God. But this recognize the sovereignty of God, and Bridges deals with this nicely in his book. You must believe what the Bible says about God. He's in total control. That's critical if you're going to survive bitterness. So that person who was drunk and killed your daughter in a car accident, right? God's in control. God is sovereign. He has permitted it for, he didn't cause it, but he's over all things, and we're going to have to just trust him. Joseph will learn, you guys meant it for evil, what you did to me. You're rats, horrible brothers, but God meant it for what?
Good.
For good. That's sovereignty.
You know, this
That is
year,
sovereignty.
that's been like the main theme in all my Bible studies is God intends only good for you. And that, I mean, it's like light just went on a second ago about the bitterness. God's still bitter. No, when you look, hindsight's 2020 and the lineage of Christ, and it's like, how, I mean, in the situation, it's easy to, I'm having a hard time believing God means this for good.
Yeah.
But when the story's told in the end, it's, how can you ever doubt? I mean, we do it all the time.
Yeah.
I do it all the time, that God only intends good for you. It's hard pill to swallow, but when you look at this particular story, it's how can you ever doubt it?
It's a classic. And those who are called by God in the salvation, to those who love God, he's working all things together for our good.
Amen.
I believe that. I have to.
Amen.
I can't do life without that. So here's a recognition. Naomi recognized her bitterness. So first, if we're going to have a solution to this, we have to say, hey, okay, we got an issue, we have a problem. We have a problem. Okay, Houston, we got an issue here. All right, now, what are the reasons for bitterness? They're innumerable. I'm going to say my short list, number one, typically as I'm dealing with someone with bitterness, their view of God is really distorted. So wrong view of God, number one. Typically the reasons for bitterness, a wrong view of God. No, Naomi, the reason you're in the mess you're in, you and your husband walked out on God, you left Bethlehem, you went into a pagan land, you didn't trust God, everyone else stayed back, they survived, you left, you made choices that led to bad things. And God is different than that. In this text, when you look at Hebrews 12, it talks about the grace of God in verse 15. So looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God. And it's not talking about losing salvation. It's talking about living in such a way that you basically have jammed the grace conduit, and you're not getting grace. There's not a connection. You're saved, but you're not getting grace. You've jammed the system. You have. Okay? But what we do see is God is gracious, the grace of God. He's only good. He doeth all things well. He worketh all things together for good. So my first point I'm going to try to get people is to dwell on the nature of God. Who is God? The God you've described is not the God of the Bible often. So right view of God. Reason you're bitter is you've had the wrong view. Number two, you've had the wrong relationship with man. You didn't follow something here. And I love this text right before this in the same paragraph. Verse 14, there's your main verb, follow peace with all men. And that's the verb here, present imperative, keep following peace, keep hunting it down. It's a hunting term. So it's a picture of a foxhound chasing the fox.
My Bible says in the rest of that verse, without which no one will see the Lord.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Mine says, make every effort to live in peace with all men and be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord.
Yes. That's exactly right. And you're not saved by, your good works or your holy acts. But if you are saved, you're positionally set apart. You are holy positionally. And if you're really saved, you should show it by your life choices, which should be acts of holiness, which also should be seen relationally, that there's a change in your heart. And now, because of God's grace, you can love the unlovely. You can be a person who's a peacemaker and follows peace as much as possible. So follow peace with all men in holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. So these are evidences of one who's been truly converted. I often go to Romans 12:18. If it be possible, as much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. And I like that text. As much as lies in you, God's saying, I know you got a limit. I know I know you can only go so far and so long. I know your limitations. Trust me, I know your limitations. And go as far as your limitations by the grace of God. Do it, as much as possible. Go down this route. Blessed are the peacemakers. Go for it. As on your side, you can't control the other side. Our marriages, follow peace with all men, with your wife, as much as you can. You try to live at peace. Try to be a peacemaker.
I'm just staying single.
Paul says that's far better.
Yeah, amen. But the reality is, you follow peace. What can you anticipate from that person that's hurt you? It can get even more painful. Okay. And often it does. So this pursuit can be very, very painful.
Hey, Pastor,
Yes.
I had a situation at work last week. We're down one person, one support person. She left to go to another agency, so our work is jammed up on everyone else. And I was sending email back to this particular person who I love to death. Nice young woman. She's married and got a kid on the way, 7 months pregnant. So I was sending stuff back and forth, thinking I was doing the right thing, and then she called me and just tore into me. And after 9 years of joking around and having fun with her, I couldn't believe she wasn't cutting me. I had some slack. I said I had some goodwill built up. She just like I was public enemy number one. I sat there. I was going through some trouble with some medication changes. I was kind of edgy and sad, and bouncing back and forth between the two. I had so many urges to tell that woman where to jump, and I didn't, because I knew it would crush her. Then I remembered also in the midst of that, she's 7 months pregnant, so I got to imagine she's bouncing all over the place too. So between the two of us, we were bouncing. I just sat there and listened to what she said. I said, "You're absolutely right. I shouldn't have done that. I didn't see it the way you see it. I wished I had, and I wouldn't have sent it. So I'm sorry." And she accepted my apology.
Yeah, that's really great.
But what happened afterwards is I was struggling with how I hurt her, and then I was upset with her tone and her it was quite vitriolic tone.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I had a guy that I can talk to, because guys don't get into all that emotional stuff. So I got a guy I can talk to kind of bring it down.
What's interesting, these are great. That's a great story. What we don't realize is how intimidating we come across. Look at the size of you in that.
Yeah, I don't. My voice goes like crazy, and I'm telling these ladies, please don't snap.
Yeah.
Because when I snap, I will blow the wax out of your ears,
Yeah.
and I won't even know it.
Yeah.
Seriously,
And what you don't realize
I'm
is just your physical size and the tone of your language,
Yeah.
the force of that.
Yeah.
We have a guy that comes to Camp Grace, I love dearly, great worker. And he's 300 plus pounds, he's a bear. He's built like a bear. But what happens is we get these young college kids that work, not Seth, these young college kids, they don't know how to work. They don't know what the tools are. There's no instinct on how to lift a hand or where to move next. They're not in sync. Okay. So he's putting rafters on one of our buildings up there, and he's in a bad spot. And he's hoping this kid will just get the other end of the rafter. Just a real simple move. And this kid is just, texting on his phone, whatever he's doing. And he
What, ballistic?
yes. Okay.
I have
So now so what happened because of that guy's anger and this little baby wimpy kid, we lost 3 years of building because the little kid went back to the director and said he was so mean to me and so harsh and I can't work with him. And I had to mediate that situation. I went to the guy, the 300+ pound guy, and I said, look, I understand the problem. I'd be frustrated too. These guys need to learn how to work, but you got to mentor them. They don't know how to work. They just don't know how to work.
Yeah, you gotta teach them.
And I said, you have no idea. You are 300+ pounds of pure muscle. So when you bark at these kids, it's like an earthquake or volcano coming out. Okay. And you as fathers, you don't know what these little kids that are 8 and 10 and 12 years, when you yell and scream, you have no idea the force that comes at them.
I won't be introducing that kid to Uncle Sam.
No, he probably needed Uncle Sam. Oh,
If I was in the service, I'd probably be thrown out because I'd be telling my CO, if that's what you call them, I'd be telling them too fast.
yeah. But here are the reasons for, I think the bitterness, 2 simple points is a wrong relationship with God and a wrong relationship with man. And everything flows out of those lack of love for God, lack of love for man. I love how when Stephen is being persecuted, he says, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. Father, forgive them, like Jesus said from the cross. And so the power of forgiveness, when you are hurt, you're going to trust the sovereignty of God, but you have to have that forgiving spirit and extend the forgiveness when asked for it. You think of people who are bitter, the reasons, like how they were hurt. In the crude, vulgar culture we live in, who knows how many ladies in our church have been molested by a relative? Okay, how do you deal with that? Okay, you have to forgive. But now you have bitterness you're fighting with because of someone's, evil. How about abuse in other ways? We have kids here that have been adopted, kids who don't have a father. People who make promises and they don't fulfill them. How do you deal with that? Again, forgiveness is needed. And then the thought of the money issue. You think about so many ways people are hurt. I get hurt when my kids are mistreated in their businesses. Right now, John has a contract. I think he'll be paid. I think they owe him $48,000. Okay.
How does he eat that?
You don't eat that. You don't eat that. He doesn't have enough. He doesn't have enough to eat. It really bothered me when Jim had his epoxy floor business. He did the epoxy floor in this room, by the way. When he had his epoxy floor, he was asked to go to Tyson Chicken in whatever state it was, Nebraska or wherever it was. And they wanted him to do a section of the floor. And if they liked it, they were going to give him these warehouses the size of football fields. Tyson's a big operation, okay? Multi-million dollar contract. So Jim got up there, he had his engineer with him, and they looked at it, and Jim said, we don't feel comfortable doing this job. And they said, well, why? And he said, well, I know you have to keep your freezers on, and we're just doing sections, but they still have to do some freezer stuff. He says the temperature is too cold for epoxy to do the chemical reaction. You have to have this threshold. If it's under it, it will not work. The guy says, we'll make it work. And Jim says, I don't think we can. So Jim did more research, talked to his company, and he came back and says, look, it's just not going to work. The guy said, look, I want you to try it. And I will stand behind it. If it doesn't work, I'll pay for everything you put in it. So Jim says, well, on that basis, I guess we can try, but it's really marginal. So Jim goes into town, buys $90,000 worth of materials. He hires a team of workers. They fly to this location and they set it up and go through the normal processes for an epoxy floor, and it doesn't set up, doesn't work. And he's never paid for it.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes me angry.
How does your son pay for it?
He was in the basically special ops. He kills him.
Hide the body.
Just hide bodies. It's no big deal for him.
Yeah.
You want to kill him, and I mean that's wrong thinking. I get it, but it makes me really angry.
They didn't reimburse him at all.
No, lost it all. So he had the 90,000 on credit. Okay, so he has to pay that. So Jim, to his credit, goes down and talks to the owner of that company. He says, "Look, I am sorry. In good faith, you lent me this amount of material, and I am in good faith went to do it, and it's not going to work." And Jim says, "I'll pay you for every dollar of this, every dollar. I don't know how it's going to work, but I promise you." And what happened? It only happened once like this, but he got a call from California. There was a hospital that needed an epoxy floor system urgently. And they offered him the job for the exact same price for everything he had in that job he just lost.
Yeah.
And he earned it over one weekend.
Yeah.
Okay. And he took all that money and went down and paid that guy. The guy says, man, what do you say? And I'm just so proud of my kids. That's integrity. That's the right thing to do. Right thing to do. But it makes me angry. Okay. To lose 90 plus or 100, whatever it was, $200,000 job. You know.
Basically, just even the score.
Yeah.
So to speak.
So, but we have to forgive, and often we get bitter over money. How about an inheritance issue? Okay, someone rips you off. Someone didn't pay you. Often money, we get bitter over money issues. People lie about you. You get bitter. You get overlooked. You get betrayed by a friend. Whatever. So there's a lot of reasons people get bitter. You have your story, I have mine. Okay. What are the results? We'll end with this point here. What are the results? So in this passage I've just read, I'm going to give you a handful of results for bitterness. There's 7 results of bitterness. You can add to this list. Number 1, lest any man fail the grace of God in this text. Bitterness destroys your fellowship of God. Okay. And God wants to give you grace, but you're stiff-arming God, saying, no, I'm too angry. I'm not trusting you. I don't believe you're in control. I'm not going to obey your word. And I'm going to have this little resentment grudge match go on. So bitterness destroys, lest any man fail the grace of God. So when I went through that first list of all those symptoms that you can see, looking diligently, you see them, it's a lack of grace. They don't have any grace. There's no grace in a bitter person. Why? Because they have failed of it. They're not getting it. They're not seeking it. And what do you need? How do you overcome these setbacks? You need grace more than ever. Lord, give me grace. I'm going to kill this guy. Give me grace. All right. So bitterness destroys your fellowship of God. Number 1. Number 2, bitterness defeats the grace of God. It cuts your supply line off from God's wonderful grace. You don't lose your salvation. I don't believe that. But bitterness defeats the grace of God. You fail the grace of God. Destroys your fellowship. Number 1. Number 2, it defeats the grace of God. Number 3. Bitterness will dominate you. In this text, it talks about looking diligently, lest any man fail the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you. So what happens if you don't uproot this thing? It grows, it springs up. And I don't get it. I've got this plant in my backyard. It's the ugliest plant. I have weed eated it. I've cut it. I've dug it. And I've got Roundup. I'll probably have cancer for 100 years. I have Roundup this thing to death, and it keeps coming back. It just keeps springing up. I was like, what in the world? How do you get rid of this thing?
Did you pray about it?
No, I haven't actually. I need to, John. Yeah, Lord, kill this plant, just like you killed that fig tree. Yes, thank you, John. God's the best Roundup. You're right. That's convicting. But he says here, lest it trouble you, and that's a present tense. It means it just constantly, this bitterness issue, the circumstances surrounding it. The word here, trouble, means to hurt you, to harass, to haunt you. So when a person is bitter, bitterness just dominates you, just controls you. It just dominates your thinking. It eats you up, destroys the container. Okay, trouble you. Okay. Number 4, bitterness defiles others, and thereby many be defiled. Now, the verb that is used here is a subjunctive, meaning there's the potential that a lot of people can go down with you. And this is the master work of Satan. If he gets you bitter, and then you bring others into your orbit, and they don't respond well to the issue, and now they get bitter, and now you get a bunch of people sinking on the Titanic together, the Titanic of bitterness. And so many be defiled. I watch bitter kids. I bet their dad's bitter or their mom's bitter. Okay. They're talking about their parents in disgusting ways. Yeah, probably parents are bitter. They learn it from their dad. They learn it from their mom.
Maybe you ought to talk bitter to your plan.
What's that?
Talk bitter to your plan.
Yes. But no, bitter people produce. You can be in churches with bitter pastors. I've seen it where people take on the personality and the characteristics of their pastor or their employer or their dad or whatever may be leading. And you can be in churches where, man, something's wrong with that guy. There's this evil, there's an unpleasant spirit with everyone, it seems like. They've been affected, they've been influenced. Okay, so bitterness defiles others. Now, and this is where it gets really interesting. Number 5, bitterness develops with opportunity into immorality. Okay. And look how this thing works. Look diligently, lest a man fail the grace of God, lest he with bitterness bringing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled, lest there be any fornicator. Okay. So husbands, Colossians 3:19, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Don't be bitter against your wife for any reason. Often men get bitter because their wife is not rendering due benevolence. Okay, so now there's this intimacy that should be in a marriage, and she is cold as ice and resisting your desires and advancements, and you get angry and she gets stubborn, and now you're bitter, and it says don't be bitter towards her. What happens now is an opportunity arises and you have a relationship with the Secretary of Work or whatever. Okay. And when you trace it back, yeah, you had lust that was involved, but before the lust, you were bitter. Okay. You know, I remember the girl I was counseling with, she was into immorality, and I said, "Why? What are you doing? You know, come on." And she said, "Well, my husband was unfaithful, and I didn't love the guy. I just want to be unfaithful, get back at him, angry and bitter." Wow, stupid! What a stupid plan. Okay, so bitterness defiles others. Bitterness develops into immorality, and when you don't have a spiritual life going, you're suspect. You're really suspect. You know, you're really vulnerable to any sin. Number 6, bitterness deteriorates one's spiritual values. So lest there be any fornicator or profane person. What's a profane person? A person has no spiritual life. They're just living for the secular, for this world's warped value system, for this temporal world.
That would be a person that uses the Lord's name in vain as well.
They might, but here it talks about Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. So all the spiritual advantages that were to be his, he forfeited for just a temporal physical meal. And what I see a bitter person is often they're in debt, they're chasing the wind, they're chasing material things. Why? Because they're not chasing the Lord, they're not pursuing him or spiritual things. What's left? Just material, physical things. And Esau, his whole value system was distorted. He goes after that which is temporal, he forfeits the eternal. And so bitterness deteriorates one's spiritual values. And then ultimately, bitterness gives the devil a place of operation. Ephesians 4:26, be angry and sin not, let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. And giving place to the devil is a military word for a base of operation. So when you're a bit angry and you don't deal with the anger, it leads to resentment and bitterness. You're basically saying, here's the open gates to the fort. Bring your cruisers in, bring your F-16s in, land here, land at my base and destroy me. So what happens when I'm dealing with people who are bitter, I know I got a spiritual war here. And the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty for God for the pulling down of strongholds. We're dealing with a spiritual battle. And bitter people, they've given Satan a place of operation in their life. So there's a war going on here. There's a war going on here. So bitterness gives the devil a place of operation. Now, finally, we're to recognize it. I gave you some points you can see. The reasons, we went over through the reasons. Some of the results are given to you. Now, the remedy, we must recognize it, confess it. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Acknowledge that, confess before God. This is sin. God, I agree with you, it's sin. And then by the grace of God, please forgive me and help me to repent of it. Number 2 is repent. So first, recognize you have bitterness. Number 2, repent of it, confess it, forsake it. And what's interesting, if you're bitter, you know exactly why you're bitter. And the reason I can say that with any authority, Proverbs 14:10, the heart knows its own bitterness. So if you're bitter right now, you know exactly the story. You have the broken record. You could tell me I'm angry because of this. Boom, right? I know you can. I can. When I'm battling this, I can tell you my story. So repent of it. The heart knows its own bitterness. Put it away. Let all bitterness be put away from you. Ephesians 4:31. And then what often is involved is that you have to pray. You have to pray for the offender who offended you. Mark says, while you stand praying, forgive. Have that forgiving spirit. Job, the captivity, the bondage, the bitterness that he was in, it was dissipated when he prayed for his friends. You know, So forgive, pray for the offender. And ultimately remember to consider Jesus. So in the same chapter, look at verse 3, for consider him, consider Jesus, remember to consider Jesus, that endured such contradiction as sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. So it's a battle of the mind and heart. So recognize it, repent, remit, and forgive, pray, remember Christ. Keep your eyes on him. Keep your eyes on him. If anyone could have been bitter, you think of what they did to him. So this is part of the weeds of anger. I think what he brings up in the book's outstanding. I just want to build on a little bit tonight because this is the world we live in, and most of us probably struggle with this. Okay, any comments, questions on bitterness?
First section, number 6 was looking for number 6.
Number 6, yeah.
You have one of those.
I could get your copy. I guess I could print these out. Sure, these are my notes, my teaching notes. I'd love to.
What was that?
Me too.
Number 6, bitterness deteriorates one's spiritual values. Number 7, bitterness gives the devil place. Why don't I just make a copy bring next week? Because I think it's a helpful tool.
That was the wrong 6.
Yeah, that's discontent was 5, and then wounded
Oh, I'm
spirit,
sorry.
7.
Number 6 was you're sarcastic.
You go so smoothly from one point to another.
Oh, sarcastic.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, the symptoms you're looking for. Here's the dirty dozen. You're moody, you're demanding, you're angry, you're a control freak, you're discontented, you're sarcastic, you have a wounded spirit, you sound like a broken record, you have an unforgiving spirit, you're vengeful, you're detached, and you're angry at God ultimately. So those are, looking diligently, look out for these things. You got something cooking here, you probably are battling something. What are the reasons? Wrong view of God, wrong relationship with some person. They did something to hurt you. Real or perceived.
Can you push that to a point where there is no remedy? I mean, for instance, even in our passage tonight, where you know that afterwards, when you're talking about Esau, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. I mean, and it's like the children of Israel. I mean, they pushed God to a point where he said, don't even pray about this anymore. I've already determined,
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. There can be forgiveness, but what happens is your choice. There are sometimes irrecoverable consequences. When Adam sinned, yeah, they were forgiven, but they were no longer in the garden. There was a consequence that was unchanged. It changed their whole life. Esau's decision here. Yeah, Esau threw away that blessing. Period. That choice had a permanent consequence. Sin has consequence, is the point I think you're bringing up. You can forgive it, but you've just thrown away your birthright. You've just thrown away all that's value. Who knows the blessings we each have lost because of choices we've made. Unfortunately.
I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing now that caused it? Trying to think of something.
Say it again, John.
I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing? Am I doing anything right now that should cause me to lose blessing?
Yeah, and you don't want to live by
Know it.
yeah. You don't want to live by fear. Reverence for God, yes, but not this timidity. I'm afraid I'm going to mess up. Because what happens, you're going to mess up.
Yeah.
What?
So no, you want to consider Jesus. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Keep your mind fixed on Him. He'll keep you. He'll do the keeping. He'll keep you in perfect peace. Thanks be to God that giveth us the victory. We can be more than conquerors through Him. So our focus is on the Lord, and He's the one who gives us the victory. And it's wonderful. And we have our setbacks. A just man falls 7 times, but he keeps getting up. Gets up and keeps walking with God. And that's our story. To our dying day, we're going to be battling this flesh to our dying day. Okay.
Friction
Every day. Sparks.
You got to look forward to stuff.
What Job says from birth, the sparks fly upward. There's friction from the very beginning. Well, we got plenty of time here to pray. Any other questions? Seth, did you have a question? You get all that down? Okay, good. What do you think about working with the older guy who blasts you because you didn't put the nail in properly? How do you deal with that as a young generation? with some hothead on the job? How do you deal with that?
What happened with you?
No,
No, it's just his
Hi-
example.
it was a case study, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
You know, I think just from my past job experience, it doesn't bother me. You know, I kind of laugh it off and just do what they want. That doesn't bother me as much. More that bothers me, like I'm kind of dealing with right now, actually at work, is kids my age who are really sarcastic and cutting, and they don't know how to work, and they're not friendly. I'd rather get yelled at by some older guy that knows what he's doing than by some kid who's my age who doesn't know what he's doing and thinks he does. That's what bothers me a lot. And so I have to deal with bitterness and watch my attitude.
Okay.
But
That's easy to get a hold of.
yeah, as far as older guys yelling at me,
You
that
have to
doesn't bother
let
me.
it roll off. You have to, you can't take it.
That's I actually.
You can't take it, yeah.
They're old senile.
So you know that candy bar payday?
Yes.
They're gonna have to change the name of it because those who don't work find it offensive.
That's good. That's funny.
You know that candy bar payday? They're gonna have to change the name of it because those who don't work find it offensive.
That's funny. That's really funny. No, I like what you said, Seth, there. And some people, you may not laugh in their face when they're so angry, being stupid,
No.
but you just can't let it. Ecclesiastes talk is about, don't take it too serious when you overhear your servants cussing you out and blasting you or, talking trash about you.
Yeah.
Don't take it too serious.
And the guy that's yelling at me, at least I know what he wants. You know?
And they usually later may not apologize, like, I'm sorry for that, but they kind of come back and they kind of try to make up a little bit.
That's true. Yeah, I know
And you
what
just
that-
accept that. That's just
Yeah.
them. That's just them.
Yeah, I went through that. There was a guy that I said something. I think I meant it as just a joke or something, and he thought I was being, snotty and whatever.
Yes.
And he yelled at me. And my buddy came up to me later. He's like, "Don't worry, he'll come and apologize." And I was like, "Well, maybe I should go say sorry." So I did, and I was like, "Hey, is everything all good?" He's like, "Oh yeah, it's all good. Sorry, I didn't mean to be bad." So it's kind of funny how it works out sometimes.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, don't take it so serious. Yeah. Have any of you worked with guys like that that were like, whoa, man, he's blowing off some steam now, man. You give him some
No,
space. Give him
I
some
am
space.
that guy.
You are that guy. Well, Rich, I would say this message tonight may have been for you, my friend.
Say I don't evangelize very well.
No.